Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. We will get started with the discussion. My name's Sam Bidwell. I'm the Director of the Centre for Commonwealth Affairs, one of the joint hosts of this event. We are delighted to be joined by Freddie Wooland of the Commonwealth Security Group and a couple of guests from over in Africa. We should be able here to have a varied discussion about topic, the return of geopolitics. And in light of that, we wanted to highlight some of those issues and to have a discussion about how Africa and Commonwealth Africa in particular can move forward in this new and dangerous world. I'm going to turn now to Joseph Hammond of the Commonwealth Africa Institute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bidwell. I just want to talk a little bit about the Commonwealth Africa Initiative, and then I'll introduce the topic and the speakers briefly as well, too. So the Commonwealth Africa Initiative will be celebrating its 10th anniversary next year. We were founded in 2014 as a forum to discuss the issues facing the Commonwealth countries in Africa. Here to talk about the return of geopolitics, we have Dr. Samuel Sako, is the current president emeritus of the Abazonia Foundation, which is a registered nonprofit organization in the United States created to support the needs of the people of southern Cameroon, sometimes referred to as Ambazonia, or primarily Anglophone in a majority Francophone country, which has seen a brutal civil war since 2017. Dr. Sako himself arrived in the United States in 2010 on political asylum and has dedicated his life as an activist, human rights champion in the southern Cameroons. He is a graduate from the University of Calabar in Nigeria and the Theropon University in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So with those introductions, Dr. Sako, why don't you take a few minutes now to introduce this topic from your perspective?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me thank the Commonwealth Africa Initiative and the Center for Commonwealth Affairs for inviting me. My name is Samuel Ikome Sako, a political leader from the former British Southern Cameroons, also known as Ambazonia. I applaud your untiring efforts to bringing together African leaders, opinion leaders, policymakers, development experts, and economic operators to foster networking and facilitate partnership between African nations and members of the Commonwealth. Let's turn to the return of geopolitics in Africa. Africa has always been a battleground for foreign dominions. When you discuss Africa on the world stage, you will hear about Western interests or Chinese interests, or now the Russian interests. There's very little about the African interests. The Western interest has been to secure access to strategic minerals for their industries and defending any and every political system that makes that possible. To ensure access to these strategic minerals and resources, who do you think the West multinationals especially consider their number one rivals? Africa, unfortunately. If it were only Chinese and the Russians, the problem would be foreign to Africa. Somehow, the post-colonial establishment consider African interests as either non-existent or insignificant. Africa has been strategically deprived of her own resources and needed development and emergence as a developed continent. The fear is that if Africa were left to utilize our resources for herself, major Western industries will die. But that is unfounded, in my opinion. In this interdependent world, Africa cannot consume all her strategic raw materials. Even the US, the number one industrial economy in the world, still exports oil, coal, etc. This is the political mindset that led to the neglect of Africa and deprived the West of what was supposed to become the number one strategic partner of Western nations post-independence. Former colonial masters were more interested in what they could continue getting from Africa and cared less of what the African wanted for themselves. But post-independent Africa was and is in dire need of strategic partners to help Africa emerge from hundreds of years of slavery, colonization, exploitation, and deprivation. The African people feel abandoned by their leaders who serve the status quo, abandoned by those who depend on them. The African interest was put aside by the neo-colonial order, resulting to political puppeteering, benevolent dictatorships, non-democratic political systems put in place, civil wars, coup d'etats, assassinations, poverty, insecurity, and criminal exploitation of resources. These are the root causes of the persistent underdevelopment, insecurity, political instability, and anti-Western sentiments that created the favorable climate for the return of China and Russia in Africa. Call it the new geopolitics. Under the weight of popular discontent, underdevelopment, and generalized insecurity, embattled governments in Africa do not care about a fight between the West and Russia or China. It is none of their business, so they say, that they are concerned more about their political survival. Hence, the voting record at the United Nations on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and other human rights. However, the African people are the ones bearing the brunt. African governments are enjoying this moment, I should tell you. Suddenly, the masters that despise them now have serious competition. Africa has everything to gain if only she can manage this era well to secure her interests. So a friend told me on the continent. Competition is ever good for the client. So we say. But let me answer this one question. Are Russia and China prioritizing Africa's interests? And in my best judgment, the answer is no. They too have missed the mark. They are responding to the needs of the ruling or political class instead of the people. African political leaders have a bigger issue called political survival. The people of Africa and the leaders of Africa are on different pedestals. Russia especially is proposing to help African leaders survive. That's why they are in Mali, Burkina Faso, Sudan, Central Africa, and now making headways in Guinea and Cameroon. China, on the other hand, is saying to the African leaders, I will help you better than the West and without preconditions, but without majoring on addressing the African interests, that makes them the other side of the same coin. Africa is not looking for new masters. Africa is looking for friends and strategic partners. China is massively buying land all over Africa. Bad approach. They have a migration agenda that does not sit well with Africa or Africans. They are not really creating jobs for Africans. They are creating jobs for themselves and lining the pockets of a few autocrats. They are practicing economic recolonization. They are not building the major factories in Africa to help Africa's transformation. They are busy extracting natural resources in exchange for so-called development loans for projects which they execute in the most part. So what should the West do? Number one, 5 things. Come back to Africa or stay in Africa and establish some of your industries there instead of taking out raw materials to industries in other countries in Asia or probably in the West proper. Number 2, treat Africa as a partner in development and not as a source of raw materials. Number 3, show interest first in what Africa has, but in what Africa wants also. Number 4, invest in the future of the continent. That means in democracy, in security, and political stability. Respect Africa and not treat good African leaders condescendingly. This especially to the French. Desire for Africa that which is also good for your own countries or the West. Love a good neighbor as yourself, so the good book says. And finally, the West may weaponize aid that translates into direct support for autocratic leaders, but do not weaponize investments that help the African people, because the Russians and the Chinese are restaurants, political restaurants. The West should help Africa build her kitchens. and they will own the future with us.